You don't have to love the band, but you can't overlook. And by the way, if you didn't know this, I hope it annoys you. The song Metal Health had something in it. Randy Rhoads leaves Quiet Riot. Neither of those two played on this record. And if you look on the back of the album, who DuBrow dismisses as posers, they went off and joined another band. Check out what we got here. Okay, hey, welcome to the AudioMover channel. I'm Robert John Hadfield, and I have in front of me Quiet Riot's Metal Health. Now, love it or hate it, this is one of the most important albums in heavy metal history. And because this was the first time a heavy metal album would reach #1 on the Billboard 200. And I found something really, really cool. It's in this old Hit Parader magazine. They actually have an interview with the guys in the band, and they talk a little bit about what that experience was like, what changed in their lives. And you get a glimpse into Kevin DuBrow's arrogance in this article, which is always funny. And also, there's some interesting connections we're going to go through related to, obviously, Ozzy Osbourne with these guys. So I think you're really, really going to enjoy what we have here. Now, before we jump into the article, we're going to do our AudioMover Rock Trivia Challenge and see how many of these answers you know. Okay, first question. Chuck Wright played bass on the song Metal Health, not Rudy Sarzo. What other debut album did Chuck Wright play on in 1984? Okay, now several of you have said, hey, instead of giving us fill in the blanks, why don't you give us multiple choice? So this one's multiple choice. Jufria, their debut album, Dokken, Breaking the Chains, or Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force. Metal Health, this album, was produced by Spencer Proffer. Which one of the following albums did he also produce for Pasha? Anthrax, Spreading the Disease, The Fix, Phantoms, or King Cobra, Ready to Strike? Okay, last question. Which song on this album, Metal Health, was actually a holdover from the previous incarnation of Quiet Riot? Was it Breathless, Don't Want to Let You Go, or Slick Black Cadillac? All right, pause the video, go down below, put whatever answers you know, and at the end of the video, we'll go through these answers and tell you what the actual answers were. And hang around to the end of the video because we're going to open another package on camera. I order records like crazy these days for the show, and this will give you a sneak peek into some of the stuff that we are looking at doing. So, Quiet Riot's Metal Health. This came out on February 28th of 1983, and I saw them in concert opening up for the Scorpions just a few months after that, and you remember just how huge this album was. I mean, the song Come On Feel the Noise was everywhere. Of course, that was a Slade cover, but it was all over the place. And then the song Metal Health also was getting played all the time, but Quiet Riot was just enormous. But what's pretty fascinating about this to me is that this album and this band kind of over the years seems to have almost been like dismissed a little bit. I don't know if you ever listened to this, but Billy Corgan has this really cool podcast. I think it's called The Magnificent Others. And he interviewed Rudy Sarzo. And of course, there's Rudy Sarzo. He's, kind of the classic lineup that we know of Quiet Riot. And of course, anytime I see Rudy Sarzo, I'm automatically interested because you know what it was like back in the 80s. Rudy Sarzo seems like he was just kind of popping up all over the place. So I watched this interview and Billy Corgan asks him something like, do you think that album, that band really gets kind of the recognition that it deserves, the credit or the respect? And I thought, that's an interesting question because I do think that this band has been kind of overlooked and dismissed, especially when you consider the impact that they had on this music and basically the 1980s in general, especially when you look at a heavy metal standpoint. So as I'm getting ready to do this video, and I'm doing my normal research, reading up on things, kind of making sure I got my dates straight and everything else, I look behind me, and on the shelf, there's this book that's always just kind of sitting up there, and I bust it out every once in a while. It's called The Book of Rock from the 1950s to today, and I thought, I'm going to just take a quick look in there like I do sometimes and just see what they have to say about Quiet Riot. So it's in alphabetical order, so I get to P. Okay, there's Prince, obviously, Procol Harum, Prodigy, Psychedelic Furs, Public Enemy, Pulp. How could you possibly overlook Pulp? Suzi Quatro, Queen, Quicksilver Messenger Service. Okay, so we got to be getting close to Quiet Riot. Wait a minute, Radiohead are... Quiet Riot probably all told throughout the world sold in the neighborhood of 10 million records. They broke a boundary in the charts and they set the stage for all these heavy metal bands that would come after them, and they're totally dismissed. You don't have to love the band, but you can't overlook the fact that they had a huge impact on the world of rock music, and especially heavy metal back at this time period. And I'm going to actually show you right now. I found a newspaper that has the Billboard top 200 that'll show you when they reached that number one status. So there it is right here on your screen. The top LPs, November 18th of 1983. Number one, Metal Health. This is at the same time Lionel Richie has Can't Slow Down, Michael Jackson's Thriller, Police Synchronicity. These are giant albums. These are big, big things. And Quiet Riot was number one over them. Number 11, Pyromania. Now, I don't think Pyromania on the top 200 ever hit number one. I think they hit number two. That's the thing here. All this stuff was happening at the same time, and Quiet Riot was the number one. This album was the number one album. And look over here on the hot singles. Number 5, Come On Feel the Noise. Quiet Riot. I'm going to jump into this article, and I think you're going to find this super fascinating, listening to what these guys have to say at the time when this was happening. Kevin DuBrow lets it all hang out. Yeah, I've got some things I'd like to talk about. Quiet Riot lead singer Kevin DuBrow punctuates his comment with peals of lingering evil laughter. DuBrow's response as he towels off from a late afternoon shower in a Phoenix, Arizona hotel room came as the result of this interview's tagline, in which I asked whether Kevin had something to add that hadn't been touched on during any of the conversations that have surrounded the metal quartet's rise to fame. And this is where he was really off-putting. Matter of fact, that Billy Corgan interview that I talked about, he even mentions this, that a lot of people just did not like him, because you get a real sense of why when you listen to these different things I'm going to read to you. This is so fascinating. It's an old ploy that in other interviews usually gets a hi mom or buy our record in return. And given Kevin's good spirits, the band had held Black Sabbath to a heavy metal draw the previous night in Las Vegas. And by the way, just to put this in context, Quiet Riot, at this point in late 1983, was now opening up for Black Sabbath. And Black Sabbath is on their Born Again album tour. So this, in other words, this is the time period where Ian Gillan is singing for the band. Now, when I saw Quiet Riot, they were opening up for the Scorpions earlier in the year. Now they're on this tour with Black Sabbath. And while they're on the tour with Black Sabbath is when Metal Health becomes the number one album. So the date, this would have been on November 25th of 1983. That was when Quiet Riot opened up for Black Sabbath in Las Vegas, when all this stuff happened. And his confident manner in discussing the follow-up to Metal Health, it'll be Metal Health sides 3 and 4. When you've been playing as long as we have, you can't be surprised to know there's already enough songs in the can for 3 albums. Nothing meatier was expected. Now, by the way, and you have to put this in perspective. Metal Health had been released on February 28th of 1983. And here we are having this discussion where the album went number one in November, so 9 months later. So they're already thinking about their follow-up album, which is going to be this album, Condition Critical, which won't do nearly as good as Metal Health. But like he says there, this album really did seem like just Metal Health Part 2. Even as much as they put another Slade cover song on here, Mama We're All Crazy Now. So it really, like he said there, it really was just kind of a continuation of the same thing. But the look on Kevin's face said that that a whole lot of stuff was about to hit the fan. Now this is where you start listening to just the utter arrogance, why he was so off-putting to people. Listen to this. I want it known that I take full 100% responsibility for all the crap Los Angeles bands that are being signed because of the success that Quiet Riot has had, fumed DuBrow. And it really pisses me off. Okay, next page. But don't get me wrong. I'm glad our success has created a situation where Los Angeles bands are being signed, because none were being signed before. But I wish the record companies would at least sign some quality stuff instead of the quantity crap that they are signing. Do you see, if you didn't know why Kevin DuBrow was so off-putting before, he would just get with these reporters and he would just say all this awful stuff about everybody else. Listen to what he says here. Pressed for names to go along with his claim, Kevin cited LA bands Ratt and Black and Blue as prime examples of the second-rate acts being signed. Now, Just think about this for a minute. I mean, Ratt would go on to be this incredibly, I love Ratt. I think they were awesome. As a matter of fact, I busted out. This album would come out this next year in 1984. Ratt's Out of the Cellar. And this thing was obviously enormous. I mean, this thing still resonates today. And then also he talks about Black and Blue, dismisses them. Now, they didn't do very well, obviously, but I got to tell you something. There's a soft spot in my heart for this band and these first two Black and Blue albums. If you're not familiar with Black and Blue, the first two albums especially, and they're very different from each other. This one's a lot heavier than the second one. Second one's a lot more commercial. I love both of them. Anyway, here is Kevin DuBrow in his true to form, arrogant self, dismissing and taking credit for them being signed. And despite the fact that Motley Crue, who DuBrow dismisses as posers, were signed before Quiet Riot, he says the big record company push on their current album wouldn't have happened if Quiet Riot's Metal Health hadn't become one of the top-selling albums of 1983. Now, this is actually an interesting thing that he says this here. I've made a video about this before, but they were actually considering dropping Motley Crue before Shout at the Devil had come out. And Tom Werman is one of the people that stood up for him and said, look, these heavy metal, this hard rock stuff is a big deal. We can't be dismissing these bands. I know you don't like it, telling this to the executives at the record company at Elektra, but he says, you can't dismiss these people. So anyway, of course, they put out Shout at the Devil, and it ended up being enormous. But Kevin DuBrow makes this point. Look, we've set the stage here that heavy metal is actually a viable option that can make a bunch of money. And because of us, that's the only reason Motley Crue is even being pushed. And it's also interesting now looking back at what was going on, because think about these other bands that then had come out, that came out this year, hard rock, heavy metal style bands that came out the same year that this album did. Now, let me just go through a couple of these. 1983, Dio, Holy Diver, Iron Maiden, Peace of Mind, Def Leppard, Pyromania, Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, Kiss, Lick It Up, Ozzy's Bark at the Moon, and of course Black Sabbath's Born Again, because that's who they were touring with. All these great albums, all this great stuff, these are the guys that went number one. And record companies, they react to this stuff. They see a band like this that hits a status like that, and then they're like, man, maybe we should put some more effort behind some of these groups. So I don't know that what he was saying was all that off, but do you really need to say it? And do you need to say it like that? I have a real grudge against those bands getting signed, continues Kevin. When Van Halen got a contract in 1977, we should have been the next band signed, because record companies are known to sign according to trends. But what happened? They signed the Knack, which really did a whole lot of good. We eventually broke up because of that slight. And first of all, this is the whole point that he's making with all these other bands following a trend. Quiet Riot hits this new status of reaching number one, and then look what happens through the 80s. And his point is, going back to when Van Halen was signed, we got completely overlooked at the time. And instead, who got signed, who got big? The Knack. See if I've got that here. Just funny thinking about this stuff now. Do you remember this album? Here, this is the one he's talking about. This came out in 1979, The Knack. And they had the song My Sharona, which was, as you recall, massive, massive hit. But his point here is that, the Knack gets signed, Quiet Riot gets completely overlooked, and then what happens to Quiet Riot? Well, Quiet Riot, because of this, eventually dissolves. Now, let's look back at the history for a second, because understanding Quiet Riot, you kind of need to understand the history of what happened. So they formed back in 1973. And back in those early days, you had Kevin DuBrow and you had Randy Rhoads. These were the two kind of main guys in that band. And Randy Rhoads, of course, is this hotshot guitarist all over Los Angeles, kind of becomes a legend at the time. And a lot of people kind of put him as a parallel to Eddie Van Halen. The two of them were kind of up and coming at the time. And Randy Rhoads was a big deal. But of course, Van Halen gets signed, they become huge, and Quiet Riot goes, gone. They did put out 2 albums in 1978, but they were only released in Japan. They've been together for years. Van Halen's now taken off. The Knack gets signed. They don't. And so Randy Rhoads then gets this offer to go play with Ozzy. And so in 1979, Randy Rhoads leaves Quiet Riot and he goes and he joins Ozzy Osbourne's new band, which is going to be called Blizzard of Ozz. So with Randy Rhoads now out of Quiet Riot, in 1980, Quiet Riot basically just dissolves. And then in 1981, that's when this album, Blizzard of Ozz, comes out. And who's on Blizzard of Ozz? Well, at least I should qualify that. In 1981, Blizzard of Ozz gets released in the United States in March of 1981. It had been out for a while in Britain, but it was released in the United States in March of 81. And look who's on this album. Obviously Ozzy. There's Randy Rhoads, who had left, again, Quiet Riot back in 1979. There is Bob Daisley playing bass, and Lee Kerslake is somewhere back there in the back playing drums. You can see them listed right there. Now, this same time, when this gets released, when this album is released in the United States, Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake are unceremoniously dismissed from this band. They've already recorded the next album. And who do they bring in to play with Ozzy? Rudy Sarzo. But this album's already been recorded. Now, this is what's so fascinating about this. So Rudy Sarzo joins with Ozzy in March of 1981. This album is already in the can. They released this album in November of that same year. Now check this out, if you didn't know this. Look who is listed. Of course, you have Ozzy Osbourne, Randy Rhoads. We just talked about them. Rudy Sarzo from Quiet Riot. Rudy Sarzo, who joined them a few months earlier after this album was already recorded. And Tommy Aldridge. Neither of those two played on this record. And yet they're the ones listed on this album. This happens in November of 1981. This album gets put out. Two Quiet Riot members, former Quiet Riot members, are now with Ozzy's band. Now, what happens a couple of months later? In March of 1982, that's when Randy Rhoads is killed in that plane accident. So then in September of 1982, Rudy Sarzo leaves Ozzy and then goes back to join Quiet Riot. In between those things, just to put this in context also, in November of 1982, they put out this album, Speak of the Devil, with Ozzy. And if you look on the back here, of course, this is after Randy Rhoads died. This one actually does have Rudy Sarzo playing on it. There's Rudy right there. And then the drums were played by Tommy Aldridge. And also the replacement at this point for Randy Rhoads, and everybody watching this already knows this, but it's Brad Gillis, who was the guitarist for Night Ranger. Okay, let's jump back to the article. It's ironic that now that we've become huge, a #1 record and better than triple platinum sales, record companies are signing every second-rate garage band around for the sole reason that they're from Los Angeles. It irritates me because these bands are sitting high and mighty in their little Los Angeles thrones thinking they got signed because they had talent. Well, I want to tell those bands that if it weren't for Quiet Riot, you guys would still be playing tiny clubs and going nowhere. Again, the arrogance of this is hysterical. It's so funny listening to this stuff. None of these groups were together when the original Quiet Riot was around. They were all trend followers with short hair who were playing punk and new wave because that's what was hip at the time. Now these guys are walking around with their puffed hair in Los Angeles saying, "We're bad. You want to F me? I just got a record deal." And they've only been together a year. I've got news for them. They got their deal because Quiet Riot stuck together for 8 years, slugging it out when everybody said we were family friendly. Given this barrage, one would think that the years of struggle Quiet Riot, and particularly Kevin, has experienced had left a scar of bitterness that no amount of success will be able to erase. Kevin, however, denies the charge. "No," he laughs, "I'm not bitter. It just comes out sounding that way. I spent 8 years listening to a lot of Los Angeles jerks and assholes who said that I couldn't sing and that the band was family friendly and that we would never make it. Now, if I were really bitter and vengeful, it would be easy for me to have the last laugh on them. But getting even doesn't seem to be that important to me now." But while he's not bitter, Kevin does occasionally get bugged This day, one particular bad rap springs to mind, which DuBrow promptly splatters with a verbal swat. Quote, "There are a lot of people out there who think Quiet Riot made its career by living off Randy Rhoads' name. My response to that is I'd like to take my fist and shove it up their asses. Randy Rhoads was my best friend. And if he were alive today, he'd be proud of the success we were having. We didn't sell better than 3 million copies of an album because of somebody who was once in this band. We did it on our own." You can't dismiss the fact that not only Randy Rhoads, but Rudy Sarzo, both been in Quiet Riot. They both joined Ozzy. Of course, Randy passed away, but now Rudy's back with Quiet Riot. I know for me at least, and probably for a lot of you, we all knew who Rudy Sarzo was. We knew the connection with Ozzy, and it made this just a little bit more intriguing somehow. So I don't think he's wrong, but that didn't hurt. And by the way, if you didn't know this, when Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake got kicked out of Ozzy's band, they went off and joined another band. And I'm going to show you that real quick. You ever heard of the album Abominog? You've probably heard of Uriah Heep. Well, Mick Box, who's kind of the main guy in Uriah Heep, was putting it together a new phase of Uriah Heep. And if you look on the back of the album right here, you will see Lee Kerslake played drums on those first two Ozzy albums. And then Bob Daisley, he's the guy that played bass on those first two albums and actually wrote a lot of the songs too. But what happened to them after they left Ozzy is they went off and joined Uriah Heep. And getting back to my point here is that, all these guys were kind of legendary. And the fact that Randy and Rudy had been a part of that and they came to be a part of Quiet Riot now, we all kind of knew it. And it did have an impact on our reaction and also our love and appreciation of this band and this album. Earlier that day, in conversation with other members of the band, the reaction to Quiet Riot's current top of the heap status varied. Bassist Rudy Sarzo downplayed it by saying, "It's still the same gigs and the same hotels, nothing has changed." While guitarist Carlos Cavazo laughingly described the major change in his life by stating, "The only thing that's changed is the size of my pocketbook." By the way, compare and contrast these two guys to Kevin DuBrow. Kind of their humble response to this stuff. And Kevin might be just a tiny bit jaded after all those years. Kevin, though, claims a different reaction to being top dog. And an admittedly big spender who claims to have made and spent a lot of money over the years, Kevin says that while the band's current popularity hasn't tempered his life in the fast lane attitude, it has given him a more practical, long-range perspective. Quote, "I know my whole attitude changed when Metal Health went #1. Because we had the #1 album, our reputation alone will keep us working for years, even if we never have as big a seller as Metal Health." And of course, they never would have another album that would sell quite as big. But it is pretty fascinating, how long that name, that band has been able to stick around. They kept doing this for a long time. Of course, we lost Kevin DuBrow almost 20 years ago now. Like I said, he's very off-putting and arrogant, what have you. But he was entertaining. You got to say that for him. And even when you see him in concert, it was a little weird, but it was entertaining. Financially, my future is secured. Eventually, when I'm a creaking 50-year-old rock and roller, I'll stop doing this. But when I stop, I won't be poor. The interview begins to wind down. Other members of the band wander in and out of the room, preparing to move out for a sound check that will, this night, see them lock horns with Black Sabbath once again. But before departing, Kevin offers up one more example of what security can mean. Quote, "Being secure will also make it a lot easier for me to be creative. When I sit down to write a song now, it will be for the sole purpose of making good music and not because I'm worrying about where my next meal is coming from." And that, laughs Kevin, is all I have to say. Now, that line right there is so telling, not just for Quiet Riot, but for any successful band. Because what happens when a band really, really achieves success? More often than not, there's something about not knowing where that next meal is coming from. There's something about the insecurity. There's something about this not having money that gives you that hunger that allows you to work hard and put out good stuff, good art, So often these bands are so great when they're in the struggle, but as soon as they're out of the struggle, the music, And it's funny listening to Kevin say this, because it's like he's painting a picture of what's to come. The fact that it's just not going to be as good in the future because, I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry anymore. I don't have the very thing that made us great. Do I listen to this album really ever? No, I don't. At the time, I really loved a few songs on here. I loved Slick Black Cadillac. Loved that song. Metal Health, I thought that was a really cool tune. There was a couple of other cool things on here. The song Metal Health had something in it that really spoke to me, and I think it spoke to the bigger picture of the energy behind this music that would have such an impact throughout the 80s and beyond. Now, when you listen to the lyrics for the song Metal Health, they're a little bit silly, a little bit juvenile. I'm an axe grinder, pile driver, you remember all this stuff in there. But there was one line in there that for some reason, I think it almost kind of encapsulated the feeling that so many of us had about this music and about this time period and about the life that, as a teenage boy, what this was like. There's the one line in the song that says, "I've got the boys to make the noise," referring to heavy metal, I'm sure. "We'll never let up. I hope it annoys you." Oh, I don't know what it was about being a teenage boy. To this day, that line every once in a while just pops up in my head. "I hope it annoys you." What was it about that? But that line, I think of this whole album, the fact that was in there, because somehow that one little phrase kind of captured the energy of the moment, the feeling of the 80s, the feeling of this music that we love so much. There was something about being a teenager in that period and having this feeling of rebellion. I hope this music, and I hope this annoys you. Okay, let's get back to our AudioMover Rock Trivia Challenge. Check the answers, and then we'll also open up this package and show you some of the stuff that we're working on. Chuck Wright played bass on the song Metal Health, not Rudy Sarzo. What other debut album did Chuck Wright play on in 1984? So if you flip over the album here, right down there, it says Chuck Wright, bass guitar on Metal Health and Don't Want to Let You Go. So he actually played two songs on here, but Metal Health is the one that all of us are familiar with. What was the other debut album that he played on? The options we had were Giuffria's debut album, Dokken, Breaking the Chains, and Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force. And the answer is Giuffria, their debut album. And if you flip it over right here, you will see right there, Chuck Wright. And by the way, I saw Giuffria in concert opening up for Deep Purple back on the Perfect Strangers tour. I know a lot of you guys did too. And on that tour and on this album, there's Craig Goldie. Why do I say anything about Craig Goldie? Because Craig Goldie would go on to play in Ronnie James Dio's band. Metal Health was produced by Spencer Proffer. Which one of the following albums did he produce also on Pasha? Anthrax, Spreading the Disease, The Fix, Phantoms, or King Cobra, Ready to Strike? And the answer to that question is, and I've got it out too, King Cobra, Ready to Strike. And you'll see it right there, produced by Spencer Proffer for Pasha. And by the way, if you've never heard this album, this is a band that was put together by Carmine Appice. This record is awesome. Okay, if you like 80s metal, if you're into that sound, and you've never heard this album, you must listen to King Cobra's Ready to Strike. Matter of fact, I put this in here simply because I just wanted to mention it. I loved this album so much. It's worth your time checking this out if you like 80s metal. And before we do this last question, just want to ask you to go below, hit that like button. If you're not following the channel, please follow the channel. And we ask you to please share this with other people. And what is your perspective of this band and this album? It's okay, last question. Which song on Metal Health was actually a holdover from the previous incarnation of Quiet Riot? Breathless, Don't Want to Let You Go, or Slick Black Cadillac? And of course, the answer to that question is Slick Black Cadillac. All right, let's check out what's in this box. We order records all the time because, thinking about different videos we want to make. And you know what it was like. There's a lot of things that you had you had cassette tapes or CDs. Well, these are 3 albums that I just, for whatever reason, never actually owned the vinyl. And so these are things that we want to work on in the future. And so let's check out what we got here. Okay, I never had this on vinyl. First of all, Iron Maiden's debut album. Okay, I'm super excited to do a video about this stuff. I love, as you know, if you follow this channel, I love Iron Maiden, but I just never had this one on vinyl. So got the vinyl now. Give us something to look at when we're doing a video. Okay, here's another one. Another one that I never owned on vinyl, and this one, Iron Maiden, Somewhere in Time. A lot of people really, really love this one. So we're gonna do at some point in the future a video about Iron Maiden, Somewhere in Time. And there's one more in here. And this is another one, never had the vinyl for this. Matter of fact, I don't think I ever had anything for this one. And it's Iron Maiden's Made in Japan. So ask yourself a question right now. If you were in charge of making videos for any one of these 3 albums that I just got out, what would you make sure to include in that video? Go down in the comments below and let us know what you think would be important to put in those videos. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.